everybody here, and welcome John back to the server, which, as you can see, is bustling. We've had a lot of activity.
That's great. I'm very happy to be here again.
And Tyler's going to be recording this session. Tyler, did you start already, or?
Hey, yeah, we're. Hey, John, welcome.
Hi, Tyler. Good to hear you again.
It's good to hear you too. We are recording, and we just cut off whatever we need at post-production.
Sure. So thank you everyone for being here. So welcome to the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord and our bi-weekly Q&A with John Vervaeke, who is the inspiration for us all being here on this server. And the server's been bustling. We've had quite a bit of activity, a lot of chatting. We've got 3 events this week, including this one. So today John's going to be answering questions. Tomorrow, at 1 Eastern, we've got Paul Vanderklees coming by.
Oh, fantastic! That's great.
Yeah, you're welcome to come too, John, if you'd like. I'm sure everybody would love the two of you together. You don't have to.
I don't know. It depends. Because during the teaching time, I might be able to.
And then Wednesday, we've got Greg Enriquez coming for a Q&A.
That's fantastic. These are great. You guys are going to have a great time. These are great people.
Yeah, it's been great. We've having these bringing in your voices with Vervaeke guests, and seems like a nice way of bridging the work that you're doing. With the work here.
Hopefully, you can get Jordan on here too. Jordan Hall. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll reach out to him as well, and reaching out to a lot of people. So so this has been great. So thanks, John, for being here. So we've got a bunch of people here. We'll ask people. So please note that we are recording this, and we'll be uploading it to YouTube later. We can open it up. Actually, maybe I can start off with a question that we've been talking about in our meditation Sangha. Where we've been meeting. Just so everyone knows, we've been while John does his morning meditation with Vervaeke. A few of us have been meeting here on the Discord at 9:30 Eastern, and we'll do the meditation and then chat about our experience after. And one question we've been trying to figure out is with metta. Yeah. So you've described the mantra with these three parts. So, may X be happy and healthy. May I recognize X's true suchness, and may I see the moreness in X. And so we've had 2 questions about this. The first question is, when we're doing this mantra, do we pick one of those, or is it going through each 3?
No. So I guess I was unclear. I apologize for that. The idea is those are different formulations. Pick one, and I gave people different ones so they could experiment to see which one starts to resonate or work. And it'll probably shift around at different times too. But yeah, pick one of them and then do it for sure.
Okay, thank you. That answers that. And the other thing, I guess, is we were trying to figure out what is the difference between suchness and moreness.
Okay, so there's a sense in which they have a non-logical identity. That's kind of one of the big claims of all the of all of these mystical wisdom traditions. Atman is Brahman kind of thing. So I have to be very careful about distinguishing them. But the difference in the way I'm using it is that the moreness refers to the fact that everything is that reality is sort of combinatorial explosive. The amount of information out there is both quantitatively and qualitatively beyond any final framing. There's always going to be more than anything we frame, and that's hence the moreness. The suchness has to do much more with the fact that there is a way in which every determinate thing or entity has a uniqueness to it, a way in which it's individuated and instantiated that resists categorization. It used to be in the medieval scholastics used to call it the like the quiddity of it, I believe, or something like that. The idea is that if I subtract from you all that about you can be grasped categorically, there's that about you in which all of those categorization in which they adhere. So moreness is about sort of the ultimate mystery about how you connect and participate in things beyond yourself. Suchness is the mystery of how you are a non-repeatable, unique instantiation that therefore, because of that uniqueness and non-repeatability, is not properly part of any category. It's the non-categorical uniqueness, presence, here nowness, instantiation of you or of anything, right? So it's not just a property of people. I mean, so when part of what art does, in fact, is it can remind us about, you're seeing the painting of the shoes by Van Gogh, right? You pick up on there's something, there's shoes and they're old shoes, but there's something unique and non-repeatable about them, and that's what the work of art is reminding you. It's reminding you of the suchness of the shoes. But works of art can also remind you, right, about, they can open you up to a sense of awe. Suchness gives you a sense of intimacy, of deep connectedness to the intimacy of something. It's like it's pure presence to you, whereas moreness tends to put you into more relationships of awe as you sense a connectedness to that which always transcends you. Was that helpful?
Very helpful. Yes. Thank you very much for that. That was exactly. I think that was exactly what I know I was looking for. So
if I could follow up on that, can we map suchness and moreness onto Heidegger's critique of ontotheology, in that suchness is kind of the proper goal of ontology, and moreness is the proper goal of theology?
I like that. I like that. I haven't thought about that. So, but as you said it, I really resonated with it. It landed really well for me. And as long as that what you're doing is right, you're picking up on how you're trying to break out of both the onto and the theology side of the ontotheology. I take it that's what you're trying to do, right? Is that what you're trying to do?
Right.
Exactly. Then I'd say yes. I think you're. Yeah, I hadn't made that connection, so I congratulate you on it. I think that's very, very good. I like that a lot.
Very cool. Thanks for following up there.
Thank you.
All right, so we can open it up for questions. These questions can be basically, just so you know, can be on anything related to all this. I mean, if you have questions from the series, from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, from any of John's videos, to any of the topics he covers, so use the opportunity that John's given us to ask all those questions that you've been thinking of and haven't had a chance.
I'm also very interested in questions. I don't like to call them practical because the word practical is taken on a weird meaning. I call them practicable questions of practice. So like you did, Brett, from the meditation and contemplation series, or all the stuff I'm doing with other people around dialectic and dialogue, cultivation of wisdom. I'm interested in those kinds of questions as well. Just to make it clear that from the very practicable to the utmost philosophical, I'm really open to any questions anywhere in between and including.
Okay. Shall I jump in then? Cool.
I don't know.
Okay. So, hi, John. I was very impressed with the way that you spoke to Paul after our previous Q&A. So that was amazing. And also,
Well,
the way
thank
that
you.
we are.
You were helpful. You were helpful. Thank you.
Well, glad to be of service. Hopefully, I can be more helpful. I also wanted to just say that you've made a distinction between potentiality and possibility in your recent talks, and I'm very enthusiastic about that. I think that's a good move as well. My question is, if I remember correctly, you have information in your physical ontology. Do I have that right?
Yes, I think of information. Yeah, you mean you? Well, I distinguish between two kinds of information. There's
Okay.
T information, which is part of the physical ontology, and then there's M information, which is meaningful information. And the hope is that we'll be able to explain the latter in terms of the former within sort of cognitive science. That is just important because there's a lot of sloppy talk and thought out there that equivocates between those two senses in a really, really unhelpful manner.
Okay.
So
yeah, I just want to follow on that. Maybe you can, your answer will help me to clarify between the two kinds of information.
Sure.
My question is basically, well, I think it is the case that if you have information in your physical ontology, that you have to have some kind of formal cause within your physics. And I was wondering if you agree with that, or if you disagree and you see a way around it.
No, I think that's I think that's right. So let's talk about the sort of the. I mean, there's lots of we can get into some math, which let's avoid that. So the basic sense of of the Shannon sense of information, and then integrating that with signal detection theory, is the idea that a signal is a probabilistic relation. So if the probability of A given B is greater than the probability of A on its own, then B is a signal for A. But B is an informative signal if B's prediction of A helps you rule out alternatives to which A belongs. So if A belongs to a set of like 7 other things that could have happened and B predicts A, that's quite informative because you've ruled out all the alternatives. And in that sense, information is pervasive in the universe because it's just that probabilistic predictive relationship. But notice the language that I'm using, right? Right, I'm using the language of probabilistic relationships and the ruling out of alternatives, which is also a probability term. And I think you're going to have to ultimately ground that in some kind of formal causation. Yeah, I think so. I would agree with that.
Yeah, some kind of intelligibility.
So that's exactly right, and so I want to be really careful here, and as I know you do too, because part of what we're doing with I don't think intelligibility is an equivocation between the two kinds of meaning. I think it's a proper bridge. The trouble I have is that very often when people talk about intelligibility, I'm trying to be very careful here, Sean, but when people talk about intelligibility, they often fall into that equivocation between those two kinds of meaning. You know what I mean? So I think the concept of intelligibility is really, really important. That there's a structure. There's a structure that makes. There's a structure of T information that appropriately affords the generation of M information, and that's what we're trying to get at. And that's why I'm really interested in the ancient idea of logos, precisely because it was an attempt to talk about that affordance as bridging between those two kinds of meanings.
Okay, cool.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I've got a long-term plan to associate the formal cause with your perspectival knowing. So, yeah, this is a good move, a good answer for as far as I'm concerned. Okay,
well, okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that was very helpful for me. That there's a lot of talk about sense making right now, and this is good. Our culture needs it, but I think we need to be very careful about getting very careful about using terms like intelligibility and terms like information. There's a lot of ways in which we can fall into very confused and confusing thinking, and so we need to take great care around this.
Yeah, and I imagine the Cartesian dualism is also quite a thorn in your side in this regard.
Yes, very much.
Okay.
But there's some very interesting stuff happening with a lot of people right now. So.
Yeah, great. I've got more questions, but I want to give other people a chance. So,
That was an excellent
Thank you.
question. Thank you for that. I'm continuing to find your questions, and I mean this in the good sense of the term, very thought-provoking.
Oh, that's great. That's exactly what I'm aiming for.
Thanks, John. Happy Mask Salesman, I think you were trying to get in before.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. I have a question, and I will best try to articulate it. Though I don't know if it's fully fleshed out in my mind, but nonetheless, I will ask. To what extent do thoughts, opinions, conversations that you've had with other people, say in the day, guide or influence your meditation practice? Do you ever find yourself reflecting on events during the day throughout that practice? And is that something that you try to shut out, or do you invite into the meditation?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. That's often why I give novices the advice of not meditating right after having an emotionally engaged conversation. As like I used to call it when it used to make sense to people, you're playing the tapes in your head. So yeah, one of the things you want to do is you want to try and treat that like a distraction, label it, and try to return to the breath. Yeah, don't try and force it out. Try and make your breath more attractive in the ways I talk about in the course as a strategy. Now, what you should do, right, is you should then, so that's sort of one side of it. The other side is you should think about taking up a practice in which you properly respond to that. And one of the things that's important to do with that I try to do is to try to move it from rumination, which is running in your head, to journaling, where you write it down and you sort of get into like almost like a written dialogue with the person. You don't have to write names like I say this and they say that, but you sort of write it out. There's a lot of research showing that the simple act of doing that move of journaling and writing it allows you to move to the third person perspective at times, get the Solomon effect, often notice patterns that you can't notice when you're keeping it in working memory. And this actually helps that inner conversation turn into almost like a proper practice of dialectic, in which you're starting to actually challenge your thinking. Antisthenes famously said that when they asked him what he learned from Socrates, and he said this in a way that was meant to be very provocative, is he learned how to converse with himself. He learned how to do this. He learned how to take the interactions with Socrates and then properly do them on his own. And so I recommend doing a two-pronged strategy. I recommend, like, in the sitting, right, and then treat it like a distraction, ing word, return to your breath, really try to renew your interest in the breath, make it more salient to you, all the stuff I talk about. But also take up a practice where you say, know what I'm going to do. And you can even talk to that part of you that wants to play the tapes and say, I'm going to give you your due. But we're not just going to run the tapes. We're actually going to work this through. We're going to actually turn this into an interactive form of reflection and restructuring of thinking. So I would recommend that as a response.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
You're welcome.
Could I get in next? So about a year ago, I realized that a lot of my problems had come from an internet addiction. And so I found it very interesting when I heard you talk about the opposition between anagoge and addiction. So I was just wondering whether you can either tell me immediate steps one could take to halt the addictive process and turn it around to anagoge, or tell me someone who can tell me, like a book or something.
Well, what if I did both? Does it have to be either or? Can I try and do both for you? I
Both
think
is twice as good.
And could you throw in a definition of anagoge for everyone, if you could, while you're answering that?
So anagoge is it's the Platonic form that's the opposite of the reciprocal of addiction. But it has more than just the reciprocal opening, because it talks about Plato talks about two important aspects. So Let's talk about sort of the inner aspect of anagoge is properly aligning the different components of the psyche, learning how to create an inner culture by which they are self-organizing in a mutually optimizing fashion rather than being beset by internal anxiety and inner conflict. And then the idea from that is that actually reduces the degree to which you're subject to bullshitting yourself and self-deception. And then that affords you picking up on patterns in the world that are where you were not seeing before because of your self-deception. And as you pick up on those patterns, you get actually better at distinguishing real patterns from illusory ones. And then you internalize that ability, and that right, and you then look for patterns within the psyche. You've developed a taste for patterns that are more real, and then that helps you notice better, deeper patterns within the psyche. That helps you further optimize. And then that reduces the self-deception. You become more able to realize real patterns in the world. And the whole thing reciprocally opens. The world is opening up. You're getting deeper and deeper into the real patterns, as Dennett called them. And at the same time, you're getting sort of deeper and deeper into the real patterns within the psyche. And you're in that reciprocal opening, you're simultaneously satisfying the meta desire to be at peace and to have a fullness of being, and the meta desire to be in contact with reality, a conforming, transforming contact with reality. So that's anagoge. It's sort of a reciprocal opening that is also cultivating wisdom, but it also has the sense of love. You tend to, in that reciprocal opening, you're sort of falling in love with the depths of things. So that's anagoge. And the person that's asking me the question is right to see anagoge as kind of the reverse, the way out of addiction. I think of addiction as the primary form of self-destructive behavior within participatory learning, participatory knowing. And so the book I would recommend to you is to read Mark's book, Mark Lewis, Memoirs of an Addicted Brain, and you can see someone spiraling in, and then you can see how he gets out. You might want to read some of his work on that. And then for reciprocal opening, for getting
Sorry,
into
could you just pop? Okay, the person who's
yes, Mark Lewis. Mark Lewis. The book is entitled Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. He's the neuroscientist. He's the guy that is proposing the model of addiction as reciprocal narrowing. And when I was talking to Mark, I was saying, but if there's reciprocal narrowing, there's also reciprocal opening. That's the Mark I'm talking about, Mark Lewis. And the book is Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. And then if you want to get into like the things that will get you into anagoge sort of the fastest, right, are real world flow induction things, right? Like, playing jazz or rock climbing or doing a martial art. You've got to get into something that can get you into the flow state, but not just in a virtual domain, because that can get hijacked, right? You got to do it in a domain where you're really wrestling with the causal structure of the world, and you have to transform in relationship to it. So, Csikszentmihalyi's book, Finding Flow, Jamie Wheel's book, Stealing Fire, those kinds of things would be helpful to start. And if you sort of did both of those, that might help you get, I think, what you're looking for. Was that helpful?
Yeah, I'll take that as a yes. Who else has a question?
I have a question concerning the meditation series and this Discord.
Please.
So, I was wondering if you had any prescriptions or other thoughts concerning how we can best support each other in practice in the meditation group that's meeting on this Discord and in general.
Yeah, what's happening in the Sangha and the chat group is really good, and this is what I see happening in Sanghas that really thrive. People ask questions of each other. They share problems, things that are finding obstacles or hindrances. They also share things that are helpful, things, nuances of practices or things they've read or looked at that are helping them with the practice. Also, you should make it part of it to celebrate, not in any sort of self-aggrandizing way, but people should bring moments where they just say, hey, I had this moment of insight, or I had this moment where I really felt really well fitted, or I was able to really see through a pattern that I'm normally locked into. And so, those things, bringing that in, those moments of celebration, the moments where you found things that afford the practice, the obstacles you're finding in the practice, also anything that's unclear to you, questions you might have of clarification. Those are sort of the main things you want to be doing. And then finally, just a sense of, encouraging people, because everybody's motivation waxes and wanes. And one of the things we can rely on in distributed cognition is other people's motivation being stronger when ours is weaker, and vice versa. And so that's very, very important too, that element of encouragement.
Thank you for that answer. That helps a lot.
But I'm glad it could be helpful.
If there is a space, could I ask a follow-up on the same topic?
That's fine with me.
So this morning after the sit, we practiced Lectio Divina individually and discussed it afterwards. I know some church groups do this as a group practice, and something we were discussing and wondering about is how to adapt the version of it that you've presented to a group practice, such as on this Discord.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I mean, I think ultimately that I think people should be doing Lectio both individually and in a group. I think that's very important. Part of what, sorry, this sounds promissory, but part of what I would like to help people to build, and something I'm trying to work on myself and trying to understand, so this is very much work in progress, is how you could have group Lectio, and then how that would lead into something naturally like Dialogos, where people would start talking about it in a dialogical fashion. And trying to see how those would fit together is sort of optimal in my mind. I think for doing it, at least trying to do it, at least intuitively, is, pick, and you should cycle, right? People should take turns. But I would do in the group sitting, I would have one person do the two readings, share their personal resonances, and then everybody sort of do the practice initially within themselves, and then like a bit of a dialogos, everybody share what their resonances were and how they unfolded it, and be really open, right? This isn't any kind of comparison or in the sense of contrasting, but everybody share, how they resonated, how they enacted, what's disclosed, what came out of it, and then you're going to have, nuances of perspective. And the idea is here collectively to try and create a very rich shared salience landscape about all the different aspects, and try and provoke each other, and try to be open and say, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That brings out an aspect that I didn't get in my own take on the Lectio, and see what would it mean to try and internalize that into your perspective, and vice versa. That's what I would see happening in a group sitting.
Thanks for that, John. So as it happens, I'm trying to draft a structure right now for a group Lectio Divina practice that I'll propose tomorrow. And I'm also thinking along the same lines, and I'm wondering if some of the stuff from circling and the intersection between circling and dialogos can be incorporated.
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly where this has to go. I see them being almost on a continuum, where the Lectio will just shade naturally, because that's the right word, into the dialogos, and then the dialogos will also reverberate backwards when people are doing their Lectio. That's exactly as I see it. And that's how I see the Lectio as bridging between dialogos and the mindfulness practices.
So maybe in future in some future Q&A, I might follow up with you on with further data after we've tried this a few times.
I would really love to know that. Please, serious request on my part. Any we're running all kinds of in situ, informal experiments on this, and all the feedback we can all get and give to each other to make this work is really, really important. Please do that, please.
All right, I'll be sure to.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Please.
So in our Lectio Divino class this morning, I'm realizing that you're going to found a mystery school of wisdom at some point down the road, because that's your forte and you love it. But I was doing some research on the Upanishads and trying to find the best translation of that. And you didn't say how long to read, and like Sri Aurobindo's Mystic Fire is like 500 pages, so I might be working on that one for ages. And then Theurgy and the Soul might be okay for my narrative, for my essay.
Oh, the Shaw book. The Shaw book is excellent. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Didn't see that. Okay, and it was interesting in doing my research that a lot of scholars through the ages have thought Spinoza's had the Vedanta deity. That one guy said that the Brahma is conceived in the Upanishads and defined by Sankara is clearly the same as Spinoza's substantia.
Yeah.
And Max Mueller said something, and let's see, yeah. So I guess he had no connection with the Hindu tradition, but yet they're saying if he would have, his system would in all probability mark a last phase of the Vedanta philosophy, which is a pretty big accolade for that. So what of his works, if I wanted to just read a few things of Spinoza, have the clear connection with Vedanta?
Oh boy, that's really challenging. First of all, I think well, I don't know. I had to when I was doing the Q&A, and I think the sort of the non-dual interpretation of Spinoza is an appropriate one, which is very much like what you're saying. And I'm trying to. I mean, the reason why there's similarities too is Spinoza is obviously very influenced by Proclus and the whole Neoplatonic tradition, and many people have noted there's some deep connections between, not necessarily historical connections, but connections in terms of what you might call, discoveries or inventia between the Neoplatonic tradition and the Asiatic wisdom traditions. D.T. Suzuki was very fond of pointing that out. The Kyoto School also has some aspects of that. Now, to answer your question, let me see. Let me think about this. There's a couple. I mean, the ethics is ultimately the thing that has to be read, and you have to read the ethics both as an argument and almost like Lectio Divina in order to really get it. And I've done that a couple times, and that'll take you like a year to read through the ethics properly. And I don't know if there's anything short of it. His earlier essay. Hang on a sec. Hang on one sec. There's an earlier thing that's much much smaller. It's sort of like a précis. It's called Spinoza's short treatise on God, man, and human welfare. And what's interesting, Spinoza's short treatise on God, man, and human welfare, and you'll find that the ethics is. The ethics is profound, and you should always end up in the ethics. But you'll find that this is more lyrical and more accessible, and therefore maybe at least initially more amenable to Lectio Divina. What's interesting about this whole kind of tradition, same thing you get when you're reading Plotinus or Proclus. You on one hand you're getting text that is very like almost it's Socratic in its ability to, its argumentation and challenging you conceptually, but at the same time it's a spiritual exercise that's doing all this other transformative stuff that can be picked up on in the Lectio Divina. But that's what I would recommend. Spinoza's short treatise on God, man, and human welfare. I was just going to find my copy because I'm trying to find the publisher of it, because I got it. I just downloaded it from. Sorry, I ordered it. I didn't download it. I ordered it from Amazon, but it just seems to be a direct print. So I think it's in public domain, and it's just been printed.
Oh, cool.
So you might be able to. It was very inexpensive. So I would recommend that.
Thank you. I'll get it.
Hi, John. I have a question.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I was just wondering if you could give me a cognitive science account of affect. So I've been reading a book called Shame and Pride by David Nathanson. I'm not sure if you've heard of that book. And he basically said he tries to argue in the book that affect is an internal amplification of a stimulus, of an environmental stimulus. So, and then Jung, I don't know if you're, I know you've had a lot of talks with Todd Anderson about this.
Anderson Todd.
Sorry about that. Anderson Todd. And Jung makes a comment about affect, saying that affects occur where adaptation is weakest. So, again, can you just give me a cognitive science account on what affect is, please?
Yeah, so there's sort of a couple. The amplification of stimulus, I think, is only is picking up on the attentional aspects of affect, the way affect constrains, reshapes the self-organization of attention. So I think it's. I don't think that's a sufficient account of what affect is. So a good place to look is like Damasio's book, Descartes' Error, when he argues that part of the role of affect, it's not just amplification. There's selection, prioritization, and then there's the project of affording the organism to appropriately shape itself in order to anticipate its environment. So I would bring that up too. Adaptive anticipation, and maybe that's picking up a bit on Jung. And this is coming out in the predictive processing models that are becoming very dominant. From the work of Friston and others, that what affect is doing is basically telling you how well your anticipation of the world is going. That you're sort of modeling the world, that's translating into its landscaping, and then that's telling, and then how well is that getting you to actively, not imaginatively, but in action, anticipate your environment. And positive affect is basically saying, is sort of feedback saying, you're actually doing better. This is, your salience landscaping is homing in on getting better at, an active anticipation of the environment. And negative affect is, right? Your salience landscaping, you're not paying attention to the right things, and you're not activating the right skills, right? And you're not anticipating the right causal structures. You're not picking up on the right patterns. So that's how I would sort of base it on the work that's coming out of the predictive processing model, the work that's coming out of some of the best neuroscience around affect, and this lines up with a lot of the stuff I do on relevance realization and salience as well, and the work on attention. So I would put all those together. That's how that's what I would say affect is doing.
Yeah, to comment on what you said about predictive processing, Nathanson gives an example in the book about a little girl that takes her daddy's papers, and she begins to, without him knowing, and she begins to rip them up, right? And she's playing with them. And then her dad comes in and then she's expecting, in a phenomenological sense, right, that she's done something right, by her playing, and her dad responds by yelling at her, right? So and then Nathanson says that's when shame happens. Essentially, what happens is that it's as if there's a suppression of your affect. Your affect is being redirected because it has you. Essentially, the positive feelings have nowhere to go. It's too quick of a change in the environment. So, but thank you for that.
I mean, I would nuance that, or at least, and say, well, what's happening is, right, there's a quick sequence of affect. There's something like disappointment, and then there's something probably like fear. And what's that saying is, to maybe, if you allow me to use some of my language, that the framing that she had when she was playing, right, is not picking up on, right, the problems that she's trying to solve, which is how to have an appropriate connection to her dad. And so what the affect is doing is it's trying to rapidly restructure her salience landscaping and her framing so that the goal that she most cares about has a greater chance of being solved.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, yeah.
Thank you. That's a really cool question. I think if I could just riff on that for a second, this is a theme that I was just talking to somebody, Mark Miller, who's really great research coming out of Andy Clark's lab, all this stuff. Like the idea that we're going to get sophisticated cognition and intelligence and it not have, very powerful, complex, self-organizing affect, I think that's a misplaced project. I think that's a very misplaced project. I think affective cognition and intelligent cognition are very deeply intertwined and interdependent, and for very good reason. So I'm open to more questions now, please.
I had a question about the meditation. So I see a lot of resonance with the meaning crisis work that you're doing and the meditation. And so to some extent, it looks like these two things are acting in concert with one another. And so I'm wondering, did the meditation inform the meaning crisis or vice versa? How much dialogue are they in? And what's sort of your intention for the meditation in relation to the meaning crisis? Like, how do you see that fitting together?
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you for that. That dialogue is intense, and trying to properly convey that to people so it's practicable for them is exactly one of my goals. So I'm being encouraged by you noting that and seeing that connection, because the dialogue it's very symmetrical. It goes both ways. They're mutually informing each other very, very deeply. So just thank you for that. Okay, that's very encouraging to me. It's very encouraging to me. The relationship between them is first of all, there's proximal. I think, and I don't have time to repeat it here, but there's a lot of the voices with Vervaeke recently. I've been building this argument that I think the COVID crisis is really increasing domicile, really accelerating the meaning crisis for a large number of people. And I think just giving them the meditation is to try and give them not anything that's a symptom suppressant, but something that really deeply connects them in a transformative way, to the perspectival and the participatory machinery that needs to be reaccessed, reactivated, restructured in order to give people both a response to self-deception and also the capacity to enhance the connectedness that's at the core of a sense of meaning in life. So that's the sort of proximal thing. The long-term relationship is that I see the ecology of practices that, because there's a meditative practice, there's a contemplative practice, there's now a Lexio practice. Obviously, as I've been trying to argue, that should merge in with the dialectic practice. And then there's all the movement practices, and there's other self-examination practice. This ecology is, right, and both how it can be practiced individually and collectively, and we're all working on this right now together. And I thank you all for that. This is that dialogue and that connection. That's the beating heart of what I think what I'm trying to get at with the religion that's not a religion. That's the long term sort of project. The immediate one is to give people real responsive resiliency to the way in which the COVID crisis is exacerbating and accelerating the meaning crisis for very many people. Was that helpful?
Yeah, that was pretty helpful. I'm sort of wondering where you see meditation in particular slotting in, because you can still be subject to self-deception while meditating.
Well, because I don't think, for example, you should never just meditate. You should be doing meditation and contemplation, but you should also be practicing active open-mindedness. That's what I meant by other self-examination things. You should also be practicing the dialogic practice, and so that you have to learn how to deal with, confront, internalize the perspective of others. I mean, you have to do many of these practices for many of the kinds of knowing, for the many different ways in which we could fall prey to self-deception. I think I would argue it's a mistake to try and sort of see from just. I want to say this very carefully because I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think it would be a mistake to try and see from just within a meditative practice how you might be falling prey to self-deception within meditation. I don't think any one practice is completely self-corrective in that manner. We shouldn't confuse the fact that these practices help us to self-correct with assuming that these practices are comprehensively self-corrective. This is a mistake I see a lot. Because these practices are so good at helping us as individuals self-correct, many people assume that these practices are completely self-correcting and self-sufficient. And I think that's a deep mistake. That's an equivocation. That's a deep mistake that has to be addressed by noting all of these practices have respective strengths and weaknesses. And we have to distinguish between the way in which a practice is helping me be self-corrective from the degree to which the practice itself can be self-corrective. Those are not the same thing.
That was an interesting observation. So that this gets back to the seeing through versus looking at, and that's what I was looking for. Thanks. That really clarifies it. I appreciate that.
Thank you. That was an excellent question.
I wonder if I can throw in a question about language.
Sure.
You've given us a great grammar vocabulary through your series and after, and I think that's very, very useful. One thing we've been talking about a little bit here in the forum is, there are times where you come up with new words like religio, and there are times where you, I think in your recent talk with Paul Vanderklay, you said you reinventio a word, so you recalibrate the definition like you've done with soul. One concern I have with that is that it can cause confusion. Especially when talking to people who have the standard, when they're very common words like soul, that when you're talking to somebody, say a religious person, and you're trying to explain this version, that first of all you have to keep the new definition in your head, and it can cause confusion when talking to a person or trying to communicate these ideas, and versus coming up with, say, a new word that may have the same root as soul, but that keeps the link, so it keeps the association as with religio, but it's clearly a new word, so it helps separate in our minds.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I mean this in a respectful sense. I think you're making a good criticism. The trouble I have is that I get criticism on the other side of too many neologisms. By the way, for those of you who know, I'm working very hard in the transcription for Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the book I'm working on. I'm also with Madeline creating an extensive glossary that will have all of these terms explicated and explained. So hopefully that will be helpful. So Brett, I kind of feel myself, and I don't know if I'm handling it well. I kind of feel like I'm caught between, introducing too many new terms which then people say that, it's getting lost in the neologism. And then also, but your point, I think, is also excellent, that, when I'm trying to reinventio a term, people are going to engage in a kind of equivocation, and I'm actually affording equivocation, which is something that I definitively want to challenge, and I'm not quite sure how to solve that problem. So what I try to do is, when I was doing the reinventio with Paul, I'm trying to pick a term, right? And I'm trying to reinventio it in terms of the functionality of new terms. So that's why I was linking the soul to the moreness and suchness, which is not traditional, Christian terminology. And I'm hoping that if I can make that association strong enough, I can sort of get the best of both, maybe avoid both problems. I don't know if I'm succeeding or not. So what I'm trying to say is I use a term. It's not the term isn't a new term, it's reinventio, so people can't say, oh, it's a neologism. But then I link it to new terms in terms of trying to explicate, like a recapturing or a reinventio of its functionality. But sorry, I'm hesitating because I'm really taking to heart the point you're making. Do you see the point I'm trying to say? I try to sometimes do the two at the same time. That's what I'm saying that because that's what I was explicitly doing with Paul. I was bringing out an old term, so it wouldn't be, oh, here's just another Vervaeke term getting loaded onto us, right? John's connecting up with a long-standing tradition. There's a set of problems that people were wrestling with when they wrestled with that, so I could put my finger on that. But then I'm connecting it to new terms that haven't been used before. So I'm dislocating it from its normal semantic network, and thereby trying to avoid affording people falling into equivocation. And that's why I also kept saying, I'm giving a secular version of this, religious term. Anyways, that's what I was trying to do with that. That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, if I could stand up in defense of type 1 and type 2 errors, perhaps, for a moment. I think maybe something that it does is it when we may be getting one of these terms incorrect is that it forces us to go into a searching mode where we have like a minor aporia, perhaps, where we have to make sense of this this dual sensing and this overlap or disjunction. And in that process, we come to look for a deeper understanding of what the person is intending. And that actually seems to be quite useful in the conversational space.
That's helpful. Thank you. Brett, I'm interested also in feedback from you. I didn't have a resolving answer, but I was trying to articulate a response and trying to tell you how I'm wrestling with the problem that you're putting your finger on.
I certainly see the problem. I can just also, especially as this movement, sort of grows and we try to sort of popularize these, I can foresee sort of pushback by certain groups, about co-opting terms and so on, and that can cause dissonance. I mean, I'll admit my preference, and I think people in the forum have different preferences. Is the new word with a similar root, like religio is a perfect example, that keeps the connection in a very real way. It's very apparent, but it's still very different. So that's my preference personally, but others may have different preferences.
No, I think that's good. And the problem I wrestled with that is the root words that we translate as soul. They come. You get psyche and you get breath, or you get pneuma, which is all. It's all this. There's all this breathing stuff. And I'm not quite. I don't know if it was doing it or not. But I take your point really well. That is the optimal strategy. If you could go back to the root and keep the connection, but then make it as a base of a new concept. That's good advice. I'm going to keep that in mind going forward. Thank you.
Oh, great. I know it's 7:30, so I think we're probably at the end of our hour. I just note you have, so this weekend is the Rebel Wisdom. It's a free online conference, and I think you're going to be speaking. Did you want to give a little preview of what you're going to be talking about this weekend?
I'm going to be, I think, in the opening panel on Saturday, and then I'm going to be doing some kind of workshop, still hammering out the details around dialectic and dialogos. And then there's going to be a sort of discussion forum with myself and Nora Bateson on the topic of wisdom. So those are the three things I'll be involved in. I'll probably get involved with some other talks by some other people, and stir up trouble and things like that. But those are the three main things I'm gonna be doing.
Oh, great! Well, thank you so much for coming by. These sessions are great, and I know there's never enough time to ask all the questions, but the good news is that you'll be back in 2 weeks' time. I think our regular time now will be what, 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Yeah. You can count on it. Unless it's a holiday Monday of some kind, I'll be here every 2 weeks at 6 o'clock to do this. I find this very valuable, not only in terms of community building, but I find this very valuable. The questions really help me think, and this is the core of dialectic, right? Not thinking before speaking, not speaking without thinking, but thinking in speaking and speaking in thinking, and I find that just tremendously helpful. So I want to thank everybody for all the really great questions, and again, I like the panorama. We move from very practical to very metaphysical, philosophical. This is just excellent. Even methodological, like we were doing towards the end. This is all tremendously helpful for me. So thank you guys and everyone. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you so much, Brett, for always setting this up. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Okay. So I'm trying to remember, how do I leave now?
So there's a little phone with an X you'll see just at the bottom of the left-hand panel, and so you can. That's the disconnect.
Yep, I see. Thank you very much.
Right.
Take care, everybody. See you yes, thank you. I'll see all of you. Well, I'll hear you all. I guess that's the right word. I'll hear you all in 2 weeks from now. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much, John.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, John.